Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. Today we are back in the book of Ghanaian folklore, written down by William Barker and Cecilia Sinclair. In the first story, we learn that the animals used to live together until they met a real bad boy, no Diddy. In the second, we have a race to be king, but not everyone agrees. And in the third story, Anansi loses everything again to greed. Again. Okay, let's begin. Quarcoo Bah Boni, the bad boy. Once upon a time in a certain village lived a man and his wife who were childless. One day, however, when the husband was out hunting, the wife had a baby son. She was greatly troubled at her husband's absence because she was unable to let him know of the child's arrival. In that country, it is custom for the father to give the baby its name when it is a week old. As the time approached for naming, the woman wondered to herself what name she could give the child if her husband did not return in time. To her amazement, the child himself answered, "My name is Quarcoo Bah Boni." As he was only a week old, she was astonished to hear him talk. The next day she got a greater surprise. She had been grumbling because her husband was not there to go to the farm for her and fetch food. The baby announced, "I will go to the farm," which he did. When he was a few weeks old, she was one day very busy. She laid him down on the bed while she went on with her other tasks. In a few minutes, several boys came up to her in great anger. "Your son has been beating us and ill-treating us in the street," they said. "My son," she cried. "Why, my son is only a tiny baby. He is lying asleep on my bed." To convince them, she went indoors to show them the baby. Imagine her surprise when nowhere was he to be seen. She had to apologize to the boys and beg them to forgive her child. And shortly after, he came in and put himself to bed. He continued these mischievous tricks until his mother could no longer endure them. So she turned him out of the house and forbade him to return. He departed with great glee. After walking a few miles, he came to a building where a goat, a wolf, a tiger, a lion, and an elephant lived very happily together. These animals were all sitting around their fire when he approached. After many polite speeches, he begged their permission to stay and be their servant, as he was motherless. The animals, after a little discussion, agreed to this, thinking that he would be able to help them in many ways. He was given a seat and some food, which he ate with great relish. These 5 animals usually took it in turns to go out to their farm, a few miles away, every morning to bring home food for the day. It being Goat's turn, he asked Quarcoo to come with him to carry back the load. The basket was accordingly handed to the little boy, and he set off meekly after the goat. When they reached the farm, Quarcoo set down the basket and ran off to play. He paid no heed at all to the goat's calls for assistance, but went on quietly playing. At last the goat was so annoyed that he came up to Quarcoo and boxed his ears. To his great astonishment, the boy gave him such a blow that he fell to the ground. Quarcoo then proceeded to beat him till he cried for mercy. He would not stop his blows till the goat had promised to finish the work, carry home the load, and tell no one what had happened. Having promised this, the goat was allowed to go free. By this time, the poor animal's face was bruised and swollen. When the time came to go back home, the goat had to pick up the load and put it on his head. Then they set out. As soon as they came in sight of their cottage, Quarcoo took the basket from the goat, and he himself carried it into the cottage. The other animals all exclaimed in wonder when they saw the goat's face, and they asked him how it had happened. "I was unfortunate enough to get into a swarm of bees where I was working. They stung me," answered the poor goat. Next day it was the wolf's turn to go to the farm. He also returned, much bruised and swollen. Goat, guessing what happened, listened with a smile to the excuses made by Wolf to the others. Goat and Wolf afterwards talked over the matter, and wondered much at the strength of the little boy. Each day another animal took his turn at the farm, and each day he returned in the same condition as his friends had done. At last all the animals had been, and all now came together to discuss how best they might get rid of Quarcoo Bah Boni. They made up their minds that early the following morning, they would start off together and leave the boy in possession of the house. They prepared a big basket of food and set off ready. Unfortunately for them, Quarcoo had heard their discussion and decided that he would also go with them. He quietly got himself a large leaf, rolled it around him, for he was still very tiny, and laid himself down in the basket of food. At dawn, the animals got up very quietly. Goat, being the youngest, was given the basket to carry. They started, and feeling very thankful to get away from the tiresome boy, never dreaming that they were carrying him all along with them. When they had gone a fair distance, Goat, feeling very hot and tired, sat down to rest for a little while. As soon as the others had gone out of sight, he opened the basket, meaning to have some food unknown to his friends. His greed was rewarded, however, by a terrible blow to the face. He then heard the words, "Shut the basket at once and say nothing to the others." He obeyed and hurried after the others, for the fear of this terrible boy. As soon as he reached them, he called out, "Wolf, Wolf, it is your turn to take the basket. I am very tired." Wolf took the load at once. They had not gone far when Wolf began to think of all the nice things in the basket, and he also said he was going to rest a little while in the shade. Having got rid of the others in this way, he hastily opened the basket. He was greeted by Quarcoo in the same way as the goat had been, and speedily closed the basket and followed the others. In this way, each animal got his turn of carrying the basket, and each was punished for his greed. Finally, Elephant's turn came. When he rejoined the others, he asked someone to relieve him of his load, and they cried out, "If you do not want to carry it any further, throw it away." He did so, and they all took to their heels. They ran for several miles, and only stopped when they came to a huge tree, in whose shade they sat down to rest, being quite breathless. Quarcoo, however, had got there before them. He had quietly stepped out of the basket, taken a shortcut across the country, and arrived at the tree some time before them. He guessed that they would probably rest there, so he climbed up into the branches. There he remained, hidden among the leaves, while the animals sat on the ground below. There they discussed Quarcoo and all the trouble he had caused them. They blamed Goat for having been the one to persuade them to take the boy as a servant. Goat, being the youngest of the company, had the domestic work to do, and he had welcomed the idea of help. Goat indignantly denied being the cause of all their troubles, saying, "If I am really to blame for the admission of Quarcoo, let him appear before us." Quarcoo promptly jumped down from the tree and stood in front of them. They were so alarmed at his appearance that they scattered in all directions. The wolf ran to the woods, the tiger to the heart of the forest, the elephant to Nigeria, the lion to the desert, and the goat to the abode of human beings. That is the reason why they live now in these various places, instead of all together as they did previously. The end. Okay, and story number 2, King Chameleon and the Animals. In the olden days, all the animals of the world lived together in friendship. They had no one to rule over them and judge them. In consequence, many very wicked deeds were constantly being done, as no one needed to fear any punishment. At last they all met together to discuss this bad state of affairs, and as a result, they decided to choose a king. The great difficulty was how to choose him. Lion was the first animal suggested, but all opposed him because they said he was too fierce. Wolf was next named, but sheep and goats refused to have him because he was their foe. They knew they would have bad treatment if he were chosen. As it was impossible to please everyone by choice, they decided to have it another way. 2 miles away was a great stool, placed under which a very ancient tree, which they believed to be the abode of the gods. They would have a great race. The animal which reached and sat down first on the stool would be the chosen king. The day of the race arrived. All animals, great and small, prepared to take part in it. The signal being given, they started off. The hare, being a very fine runner, speedily outdistanced the others. He reached the stool quite 500 yards ahead of the next animal. You may judge of his annoyance when, just as he was going to sit down, a voice came from the stool saying, "Take care, Mr. Hare, take care. I was here first." This was the chameleon. He, being able to change his color to suit his surroundings, had seized on Mr. Hare's tail just as the race began. Having made his color match the hare's, no one would have noticed him. He held on very tightly, and when the hare turned around to take his seat, Chameleon dropped off and landed on the stool. The hare saw how he had been tricked and was very angry. The other animals, however, arrived before he could harm the chameleon. According to the agreement they had made, they had no choice but to make the chameleon king. But none of the animals were satisfied with the choice. So as soon as the meeting was over, all scattered in every direction, and left Chameleon quite alone. He was so ashamed that he went and made his home at the top of a very high tree on a mountain. In the dead of the night, you may hear him calling his attendants to come and stay with him, but he is left quite alone. A king without subjects is no king. The end. Okay, and story number 3. To lose an elephant for the sake of a wren is a very foolish thing to do. In the olden times, there stood in the king's town a very great tree. This tree was so huge that it began to overshadow the neighboring fields. The king decided to have it cut down. He caused his servants to proclaim throughout the country that anyone who succeeded in cutting down the tree with a wooden axe would have an elephant in payment. People thought it would be impossible to cut down such a great tree with the axe of wood. Anansi, however, decided to try by cunning to gain the elephant. He accordingly presented himself before the king and expressed his readiness to get rid of the tree. A servant was sent to him to keep watch and see that he only used a wooden axe given to him. Anansi, however, had taken care to have another, made of steel, hidden in his bag. He now began to fell the tree. In a very few minutes he said to the servant, "See yonder is that fine antelope. If you are quick, you will be able to hit it with a stone. Run!" The lad did as he was bid, and ran a long way, but could see no sign of the antelope. In his absence, Anansi seized the sharp axe and hastened to cut as much of the tree as he could, carefully hiding the axe in his bag before the servant's return. This trick he repeated several times, till finally the tree was cut down. Anansi went to the king to get the elephant, and took the servant to prove that he had only used the wooden axe. He got his promised reward and started for home in great glee. On the way, however, he began to think over the matter. "Shall I take this animal home?" thought he. "That would be foolish, for then I would be obliged to share it with my family. No, I will hide it in the forest and eat it at my leisure. In that way, I can have the whole of it for myself. Now what can I take home for my children's dinner?" Thereupon he looked around, and a little distance away he saw a tiny wren sitting in a tree. "Exactly what I want," he said to himself. "That will be quite sufficient for them. I will tie my elephant to this tree while I catch the bird." This he did, but when he tried to seize the ladder, it flew off. He chased it for some time without success. "Well, well," said Anansi, "my family will just have to go without dinner. I will now go back and get my elephant." He returned to the spot where he had left his animal, but to his dismay, the latter had escaped. Anansi was obliged to go home empty-handed, and he, as well as his family, went dinnerless that day. The end. In that first story, where did the boy come from? That was just a wild way to begin things. Oh, your husband's gone for a while. Oh, hey, baby popped out. Okay. It reminded me of a Robert Munch story of the bad boy that keeps growing bigger and bigger as everyone hates on him. It was wild to see the bad boy act like that and then have nothing happen to him. The second story reminds me of the story of the Chinese zodiac, of the rat holding onto the tail of the dragon. And in the final story, it's just more Anansi being Anansi. I love these stories, and we probably only have 2 more episodes from this book. I'll be looking into not adding a new book for a minute, as I have a Canadian one locked and loaded, but I also want to get through a few books faster. So sorry for that little peek behind the curtain. And the podcast shoutout goes to Slavstvuyte, spelled Slavstvuyte. The Slav part is about Slavic languages, and Zdravstvuyte is kind of a Slavic hello. I know it is in Russian. I'm sure there's other cognates in Slavic languages. Dina and her new friend, I didn't catch his name yet, are learners and speakers of various Slavic languages, and this podcast gives you a window into these related languages and how different areas say different things in different ways, and just how fun Slavic languages can be. And if you like their podcast as much as I do, go and give them a like, a rating, and a review. And the listener shoutout is to the province of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, not to be confused with the island nation of Dominica. The native Taino people called the island Quisquela, meaning mother of all lands, or Haiti, the land of the tall mountains. You might recognize Haiti as the name of Haiti now. It was founded as a city in the early 1500s, and then it was destroyed by a hurricane and rebuilt again. It was also the site of the first major revolt against slavery in North America in 1521. It was also conquered by Haitian freedom fighters in 1801, only to go back to the hands of the locals. It is located on the Ozama River, and it looks like a heavenly place to visit. One of my students has family from there and often posts photos when he goes. And so to my listener in the city of Holy Sunday, I say, gracias y buenas noches. Thank you, and good night.